Hey, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Howie Jacobson. My day job is as a coach, helping people live better lives. I coach executives and leaders, I coach entrepreneurs, and I coach civilians who are looking to improve their lives, their health, their relationships. Basically, it allows me to do what I didn't think was possible, which is to help people completely erase bad habits and different ways of being, erase negative feelings and replace them with positive ones, rather than just help people develop new strategies to compete with the old ones or new thought patterns to debate the old thought patterns. And I'm looking for people to work with. And I have reduced my rates a lot so that I can just get as much practice in as I can. So I am going to raise them back up to my normal fees, but right now I just need a lot of practice and feedback, and I have teachers and mentors. So if you're interested in getting my best coaching, better than I've ever done, at a big discount, email me, hj@plantyourself.com. So let's get on with the show. Okay, Momma Kai Sanders returns to the podcast today. She was on 4 episodes ago, episode 562, talking about helping the unhoused and the homeless move from poverty to prosperity. And there was so much that we didn't get to unpack that I invited Momma Kai back, and she graciously agreed. The audio and video is better. She was able to come to us from a place that she was staying up in the mountains of North Carolina with much better internet. And we got into a lot of deeper conversations. So if you are interested in helping the world become a more just, abundant, happy, joyful place, if you're interested in helping people move out of trauma and into nurturing community, I think this will be a really useful, important, inspiring, beautiful conversation to pay attention to. So without further ado, Momma Kai, welcome back to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we are going to cover something that we just touched on in our last conversation, which was only a couple of weeks ago. Let's sort of do a brief recap just for folks who hadn't managed to listen to the other one. So can you just introduce yourself and say what you're about?
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, first of all, it's another amazing day in paradise. My given name is Kara Lynn Sanders. That's Kara. My nickname that I've had all my life is Kai, but my super shero name, which is what I say, is Momma Kai, because I found my superpowers being the mom of a young black male superhero. And the name God gave him when I was pregnant is Wisdom. And he's 7.5. He's my heart beating outside of me. And he is the most incredible gift. He's given me my dream career of being a mom. He really has. And we have been without stable housing for the last 4 years. And so we've been on this mission to eliminate homelessness, poverty, and the next generation of prisoners from this personal level to the systemic level, to the systems level. And it's been this beautiful, terrible, amazing adventure is what I call it, because it has been. So I'm just grateful to be here and grateful to share how we plan to do that.
All right. Yeah. And I'm definitely want to encourage people to go back a couple episodes before. I didn't write down the number. I'm blanking on it at the moment. I don't want to go look it up and take us out of this conversation, but it's in the 560s. And what we touched on a little bit, we talked about your story and your experiences, but you'd mentioned one of the policies and strategies that you're looking at is something called homesteading, which I had not heard before in regard to housing. Basically what I hear from policy is, well, the problem is that there's a shortage, there's not enough housing, there's too many people, so we need to build houses, we need to relax zoning regulations, we just need a bigger stock of houses. Everybody I know who bought a house and sold it for more money is very happy. And that's supposed to be like the American dream. And I just read an article that pointed out that in every other arena of the economy, that would be called inflation, and it would be bad. Right. So there's all these sort of systemic policy and economic and financial and zoning issues related to whether housing is available and affordable. And then you come along and you're talking about a form of housing and living that's like so alternative and hippie and off the grid that my mind just does a 360 and it goes, wait, what's the connection? So maybe you could start
Yeah.
there.
Oh my goodness. I would love to. So, I just have my interest has been in architecture since I was young, but I never really pursued it. Um, and I can't necessarily tell you why. Like when I originally graduated from high school, I thought I was good at numbers. So I tried to go into accounting, which was not fun. And so it has taken me a long
Mm-hmm.
time to come back around kind of full circle to where my passion lies. And I found it because I love HGTV. I love home renovation shows and different things of that nature. But it was last year, and I mentioned this in our previous interview. It was watching the movie The Need to Grow by Earth Conscious Films
Mm-hmm.
that really got me thinking about how we can make food more accessible to people. And if we can make food more accessible to people, then we can make housing more accessible to people. If we can make food more accessible to people, and we include housing, then we can help people become food and housing secure. So I was like, okay, how can this happen? And one of the things that drew me to creating homesteads, especially within the city limits, is there was a city council meeting that I attended, and they have this ordinance that's called a public nuisance. And there was a property that was up for public nuisance, which meant that the property wasn't livable. They had deemed the property unlivable. There were people living in it, and they wanted to condemn the property. That was basically how they went.
Mm-hmm.
And they wouldn't do it because it was affordable to the people who were living there. And so they had to figure out where they were going to transition to before the city council would vote to have it condemned. And so I was like, well, let me go check out this property. And on the flip side of that, there was another property that was up for rezoning. They wanted to take it from where it was to do up to 7 heights. And somebody had spoken in opposition to it, and there were I think it was 7 different houses on this property. And I was like, well, I wonder if we could just move those houses to this other property and save those houses instead of destroying them because they're historical, they're beautifully built. And I was just like, we've got to do something besides continue to let gentrification and monopolizing, this industry continue. So I went up to the property that was up for public nuisance, and literally you start walking down the street and it goes from a paved road to a dirt road in Raleigh, off a major intersection and off a major like throughway. And I was like, how is this even possible? Like I thought, this is like within the city limits, it doesn't need to be annexed, which means that it needs to be brought in to tap into like, traditional power sources and stuff. I'm like, this land is beautiful. And there turns out it's like an oasis of woodland back there. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
what in the world? There's another property was owned by somebody else and it's all wooded and it has to be like 5 or 6 acres. And I was like, there's another piece that's owned by somebody else. And it was, the way it's on a hill. And I was like, wow, this could be a huge community garden. And my mind just started going crazy. And I'm just like, this could totally be a homestead. We could put families here. And because of the street that it's along, they're trying to turn that to what they call bus rapid transit. So when you're talking about the zoning and everything like that as a housing problem, this is like, I'm like, I was like, yes, absolutely. That's part of the problem. The other problem is people qualifying now with so many different rules and regulations that people no longer qualify for, such as evictions and and just the price of, putting together a first and last month's rent and the first, and all that and the security deposit, And so, I was like, I- I'm like, okay, condemn the houses. They're no good, but what can we put here? And because this particular property is not far from where they have a proposed BRT, it could have a tiny home plus 2 accessory dwelling units, which would mean
BRT is bus rapid
BRT is
transit.
bus rapid transit. So what they're trying to do is put a bus line that runs like every 10 minutes, has limited stops, but they're at major, it's at major places. The stops are going to be very
Mm-hmm.
calculated as to where they'll be. And so, I was like, this isn't, I'm like, there, when I went to look up the property, the initial property, even though there were like 5 structures on it, it was actually it has already been zoned to be 10 different lots. And I was like, well, why doesn't the city just partner with this landowner, put a tiny home and 2 accessory dwelling units? Because since it's along the BRT, it can have up to 2. I'm like, that's 30 homes right there. You know, I was like, what in the world? And then they can have private gardens, they can create a community garden that they keep together. And I said, but the thing is that what most people don't think about is that it's not just about housing, because there are plenty of places that I go by that are like, come home now, rent here. They have places. It's just not affordable to people. And so
Mm-hmm.
one of the components for me is, how do we move people from poverty to prosperity? And that really is an internal work as well as an external work. And as I was speaking about before, in growing these gardens, what I would love to see is a program called How Does Your Garden Grow? So people can not just learn how to plant and grow their own food, but they learn how their minds grew, how their brains grew, and then have the opportunity to redevelop that garden, where they weed out
Mm.
and they take things out. So off grid, when you're looking at a homestead, you're talking rain catchment systems or solar panels, and that's where like a need to grow came in, because a need to grow has this concept called the green powerhouse, and it's like, I think it's like 10,000 square feet, but it can grow up to, I believe, a half an acre of food. It produces biochar, which I'm still not sure what it is. I need to look more into that. But it's zero waste, zero
Yeah.
emissions, and it can power up to 100 homes. So you're talking about knocking out electricity bills, minimizing rental costs for people because it's a smaller structure, and putting people in a space where they're connecting with nature and they're connecting with themselves and learning about themselves, so they can literally they can discover who they really are and what they were really meant to do. And so when you're in
Mm.
nature, like we are blessed to be for this short period of time, it does something to you that most people don't realize, because we spend so little time out in it. So
Mm.
I'll pause there.
Great. So yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I'm trying to picture the property that was condemned as a public
Hmm.
nuisance, in Raleigh. I'm picturing sort of down around where the Interfaith Food Shuttle is.
Ooh.
There's like there's urban
Hmm.
streets, and then it's sort of, it looks like just sort of like the money ran
Yeah.
out, and it's just like for something like no one's figured out how to make money off of this land that's sort of sitting there. Who like what were the considerations that went into condemning it? Was it like neighbors who were like, well, this is lowering our property values, or was there, a heating oil tank that was improperly done? Like, what were the concerns?
Well, I'm not quite sure who made the call, but what it was is that the properties, like there were holes in the even like the toilet wasn't sitting on a solid surface. Like the boards were rotting. There were holes in the side of the home, where animals could easily get in and
Hmm.
things of that nature. And it just wasn't suitable for living. Like when you go up there, you look at those houses, you're like, yeah, there was already one that was deteriorating, that there weren't people living in, but the other two, you could see from the outside how it would be uncomfortable to have um, people living in them, and and pay rent, you know?
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. So it was like, there was an absentee landlord who was making money off of people for whom this was the only thing, their only
I
option.
think, I don't think the landlord was absent. I think he just didn't know what to do because he couldn't really do any repairs when the people were in there. But
Uh-huh.
the people really didn't have the resources to go anywhere else. And so they were settling for what they could get. And according to the landlord, um, he wasn't receiving any payments for one of the homes. So they had lived in there since the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic, and it wasn't anything that he could do while people were living in there. But again, they had nowhere to go. So it was kind of like
Mm-hmm.
a catch
Gotcha.
22 for both the renters and the property owner.
Mm-hmm. Right. It seems it's one of these sort of like there's an equilibrium where nobody can move forward, and there was like it wouldn't have taken much in a way of sort of a systemic response to like move them into temporary housing, get funding to repair it, and then you've got a sort of a functioning financial ecosystem that can benefit multiple parties. But there's no means of doing that. There's just sort of condemn it and put it for sale, and someone's going to come raise it, and God knows what they're going to put there next. Maybe like a motocross track or
Right,
some neighborhood nuisance, a shooting
right,
range, right?
right. Yeah, and that's like when asked what he would do with the property, because it's not a small property. It's 2.33 acres when I looked it up. So it's a pretty large
Mm-hmm.
area. And like I said, it was originally zoned for 10 lots, and there's two homes that are still on it look like that people are living in that are in decent condition, but the other three definitely they were in significant need of repair. Um, and the owner even said that he wasn't sure what he was going to do just yet. So he wasn't sure if he was going to
Mm-hmm.
go in and do some renovations, which would be extensive and costly. And with it being on a dirt road, that also, you know, even if it's close to things, there's not any guarantee that people are going to want to bring their vehicles onto a dirt road every day. And so there was kind of a lot of complications that I could see that he was facing to get it to where it was market value. If it was a paved road, I could see that he would quickly renovate, turn it around, and he could rent it for three times what he was getting, and recoup his money within a year,
Yeah.
any money he lost.
Yeah.
But again, there, like you were saying, that move into temporary housing, help with renovations, keep people housing secure, and there's just nothing in our government, at least in Raleigh, that allows for that, where there is that
Yeah.
as an option, which is heartbreaking.
Yeah. It reminds me, many years back, I was living in a co-housing community in Durham, and it was affordable, right? And especially smaller houses, very close together, with to like 11 houses on 22 acres, but the houses were on a pedestrian walkway with room around and room for parking, and it was such a good model. And especially like the other neighborhoods were like $500,000-$600,000 homes, and ours were in the low 200s, high 180s, and at that point. And there was a move to like, let's double this. And there was this whole area, wooded area that was kind of scrubbed. It wasn't like pristine old growth, but a group of people were said like, hey, we can make this happen. And they hired architects, and things were really moving along, and they had interest. And then they discovered one of the ordinances was the road had to be wide enough for a fire truck to turn around, and it was going to cost them over $1 million just to ask to create the asphalt road. And the way the neighborhood was that there was a circle at the top. It was a thin one-lane road, but you could have a circle. But like that wasn't going to cut it. They needed a large two lanes, at least 15, 20 feet across. And so it was financially unviable. It would ended up having cost as much as the other homes. It just seems like there's, um, you know, regulations that are put in place to protect people from the worst also seem to prevent the best.
I would 100% agree with you. The whole concept of ADUs or accessory dwelling units has been language that has been written into the UDO, or what they call the Unified Development Ordinance here in Raleigh. And so that was supposed to be able to increase density. But in doing that, the owners of the property actually have to put in plumbing and electrical that has to be separate from their home in order to build it and rent it. And so instead of being able to buy an already built tiny home that can run anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000, I mean, luxury, they have all these kits nowadays where you can you can take a shed, you can buy a shed and turn it into a tiny home for, less than $10,000, put a rain catchment system on it, solar panel, and call it done and rent it. You can't do that. So even though they've created this to create density, only people who can afford that initial $40,000 investment to get the trench dug for sewer lines to be put in and, the electrical to be put in and stuff like that can afford it. So it's not being done. So it's another example of, okay, you've done this regulation that will help increase density, but you've also minimized the impact it could have by putting all these other restrictions on it, including like design. They had like what they call fast track. And that's where where some architects have already submitted designs, and you can pay for the already made designs to be able to be built, and it's like, sometimes it would just be nice if we could put people in homes without all the rigmarole that's around it. So they make it it's been really, really challenging. And for some of that, it's not even just at the city level. It goes all the way up to the state level of what the state has deemed can and cannot be done. And so it's been, it's been an interesting journey to just realize like what has to be broken apart or dismantled or changed just to create change, before other change can even be implemented.
Do you have a sense of how much of this, the obstacle ordinances are, basically good, goodwill intentioned things that are just that people aren't seeing, and how much is let's keep poor people out of our neighborhood?
Ooh, NIMBY, not in my backyard. That's what they call it here. I think it is a little bit of both. Like when I saw the fast track designs for the ADUs, I was like it seemed really bougie. Like, you can only have a certain style and design, in people's backyards. We want to keep this certain look. We don't want, quote unquote trailer park trash here, in the city. We need to keep it classy. And yeah, it felt very like, oh, we're going to take this to increase density. But like one of the ADUs that was built from scratch with the architecture and stuff, like I remember the real estate agent, because it was a real estate agent that built it on a property she owns. I remember her talking about the process, and I was like, oh, okay, so this is going to be affordable. I went and looked up the address, and she's charging $1,300 a month for it, for like 600 square feet, And I was like, so whatever they were doing, and $1,300, I mean, that's what you can pay for an apartment. You know what I mean? So like, you have to be really, really, really wanting to live in a tiny space and pay that much money, to be living in somebody else's backyard. And so it does seem like there was definitely some interest in increasing density because Raleigh is such a happening place now. Someone called it the Silicon Valley of the East, but again, who is it for? And as long as we have these antiquated ideas of people who are unhoused and what that looks like, there was an executive director of a nonprofit who I spoke to about a month ago, and she was talking about how she was about to be evicted because the property that she lives on, the home that she lives in, the property management company switched without her knowing. She didn't have a lease, a traditional lease with the last company. And so when they switched, they were like, well, you need to sign a lease. And it was totally different than what she had been doing. And so she went to an organization for help, and they told her they couldn't help her because she didn't have a lease. Even though they had the ledger payments that showed that she had been paying, when she went to another organization that's supposed to help with rental payments, it was, oh, well, we can't help you. You don't have a lease. And so there are like a lot of little things that keep people from getting the help they need. And she's an executive director of a nonprofit who, she lost her job earlier this year, just struggling herself. Her nonprofit is not one of these big ones that get a whole lot of government funding. They're struggling every day, but the beauty of it is that it is in the community, and it's working with the community and having the tough conversations and hearing the complaints and stuff like that. And so but it's also part-time, it's not anything she could do full-time and have an income that would sustain her in the midst of building. And so we don't understand people's stories when it comes to people who are unhoused, and until we do, and we stop looking at people as less than because of their financial situation, then it's going to be a really hard road to fight. And I say this sitting on the homelessness task force here. And for 4 months straight, I've been saying we've been living out of our car. For 4 meetings straight, I've been saying we've been living out of our car. And at the same time, one of the director of our affordable housing unit for Wake County has said, we have millions of dollars. We partner with developers and landlords. We have millions. We have plenty of money. We have plenty of money. And yet not any of them thought, wow, we need to put Momma Kai in housing. We need to put her in charge of getting this set up, so we can actually address this and do something about it. And then it hit me after last month's meeting is that if you eliminate homelessness, her job is gone. There starts the path of her having to find a different career. And that's what really kind of one of the things that continues to sit in the back of my head is that one of the barriers to eliminating homelessness is not even people who don't like homelessness, is that we have an industry, we have a system that it requires people to be unhoused and food insecure in order for others to be housed and food secure.
Hmm.
And I think that is the biggest barrier that we face.
It sort of reminds me of the healthcare industry.
Right. They're not really caring about.
Right. that any system that's created is not going to eliminate itself. Right. The primary goal becomes the perpetration of the system.
Right. And we don't.
Right.
Go ahead.
I've had several cardiologists on this show who've talked about being reprimanded by their department heads for not making enough money because they're helping people avoid surgery. They're helping people, reverse disease.
Yeah. And they're not taught that. So right, when they go to school, they're taught how to prescribe medication, right? They're not taught preventative measures, and that's a huge thing, unless you go into become a naturopath physician or something like that. But still, and yet, in order to get your MD, you have to still go through that whole process of indoctrination, really,
Right. Well, and indoctrination is partly about what's possible, but it's about the boundary around what's possible. Right. So can we jump to that 2.33 acres with 10 lots, 1 primary and 2 ADUs, and can you just tell us what it in your imagination what it could look like?
So I see that there is there's these things that I learned about. We had this event a couple of weeks ago in July. It was hosted by an architecture firm called In Situ Studios here in Raleigh. And it was this it was it was a series called Real Matter, and they had 7 different speakers in a 10-day period, and most of them were architects that came from different places around the country. And we actually had one from Mexico. It was a female architect from Mexico in this series. But one of the people who spoke talked about these structures called Quonset huts. It's Quonset, and I had never heard of it. But when I saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what we need here. We need Quonset huts. He said where he's at, he's becoming known as the Quonset hut king. And I told him, I said, well, I might just be the Quonset hut king because that's what we need here in Raleigh. And so,
Can you
yeah,
describe it?
they actually started during, I think he said World War II. And when I looked it up, it looks like an old bunker, like the semicircle with, it's just like a half circle above the ground and the other half would be underneath, But what was so fascinating about it is how they devised the space to be usable. So the whole thing was completely usable. And I just thought, one of the other speakers talked about how when they tried to design with nature in mind. And so, and it stands out to me because the place that we're staying in, it has a stone floor. And when we're in there, it's, the temperature's cool. And they told me that there's no air conditioning, but it was built that way. So the back part of the house is partially underground. The floor is stone. So in the winter, there's these huge windows that capture the sun, warm up the floor and keep it, at a relatively warm temperature. But in the summer, the stone stays cool, because of the canopy of trees. The sun is not coming in as much as it does in the winter when the leaves have fallen, And so with these Quonset huts, I see this particular 2.33 acres, it doesn't have a lot of trees. So I can see these Quonset huts with skylights to bring in the sun, to help them, capture the heat once again. And if necessary in the wintertime, to have it so that they can close. But to have 2 accessory dwelling units on the property, and I see maybe someone who is special needs in one, but is looking to be self-sustaining. And so it's just a small structure that has everything that they need without being overwhelming to like keep clean and to live in. And then maybe in the other structure, there would be someone who's active but elderly. And so there's a family in the larger structure, the Quonset hut, and then there is these other 2 individuals, and they become like a family, even just within that one lot, But then being part of the larger lot, the larger community of homes, you have all types of people with their needs being met, A lot of times our elderly end up in silos. We have so much senior housing going up, affordable senior housing going up, which is great. But once you get in there, people think that they're going to connect with one another, and they often end up siloed where, they still want to be active. They don't just want to hang around other old people, like that's the reality.
Yeah.
But if they have somebody right there on the property that they can call on, they have people that are, they can communicate with. They have not just other elderly people, but perhaps children, mostly children, because I want the family, the Quonset huts to be for families in particular. And I think it would be sustainable because most families are used to living in hotel rooms, which are only so large. Even if you have a room with 2 double beds, I've seen families sleep in a room with 1 double bed and the kids are on the floor, either on an air mattress or sleeping bags or something along those lines. So I just see this as a sustainable community where everybody's working together, that there's that we may not use all 10 lots for these Quonset huts, but we would take maybe the center lot. There would be like 4 lots on either side, and then the center there would be like more like a community center where people can come together, do communal, community meals, with like a commercial kitchen. The kids can come there to be tutored, and it becomes its own little self-sustaining community. That's where, our elders can go for their, if they want to have group activities. But there would be classrooms there, or a meeting room, a gathering space for people to come together and be community, and also would be the main structure where there would be where the community garden would be behind, so that they got whatever's not being grown personally, it would be there,
Gotcha. So I want to come back to the community garden, but there's a couple of things I'm hearing here in this model, and my head is around this because I'm working on an article for Food Revolution on companion planting.
Yeah.
Right, like corn, beans, and squash all support each other, and I'm hearing like companion planting in these individual lots, right? And last time we talked, you talked about what it was like to try to get services as the person being served. Like there's people who are helping and people who are getting helped, and it's a very clear division, and there's a huge inequality in it. And what I hear you talking about here is it's unclear who's helping whom, right? There's an active person, there's a person with some disabilities, there's families with children who need care. The children can kind of enliven the lives of elders. It gets very confusing. You're not really sure, who's the hero and who's being rescued, which is beautiful.
Yeah. And people get to explore who they are and share their gifts and talents. And we should all be able to be superheroes. That's why I call, when I talk about my son and I talk about the 3 top lessons I've learned from him, the first thing is that his name is wisdom, but I've learned that we are all wisdom. That's where we came from. We all learn what we live, and we live what we learn, especially young children when they're in those first, 3 to 7 years, when their brains are really fertile, and it is just fertile ground that every seed that is thrown on it grows. It takes hold and it grows, and as a parent, we have to kind of do the pruning externally and kind of help, because some of those things, they take hold and they don't go away, and so, but we get to, create the boundaries and help. And so when you have these experiences where you bring people together who are wisdom, then you can only get beauty, But the other thing that I talk about is that all children are superheroes because they can change their identity based on who they're around. So we want to create a community where everybody is safe, where everybody feels loved and welcomed and useful, and that they are living their lives full of purpose, and that they're getting and receiving, that they can empty their well, but they know they can do that safely because they know at the same time it's being filled, and we really don't have that. Like, either you're emptying yourself and you empty to the point of exhaustion, and then you end up in a state of, depression. A lot of times you end up in a state of just disgust, frustration, and we all should have this opportunity to have a fullness to our lives, from giving and receiving.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that I'm hearing about this structure is there's a way in which our capitalist society puts us in competition with one another, whether you mean for it to happen or not, and that you're really subverting that in this community. And I'm thinking about like what this could look like, and I'm drawing a little bit on my own experience of co-housing, which is not nearly the same, but it's got some similarities around things owned in common and communal meals and community, cleanup and garden days. And I remember, when we had just moved in and we heard about Katrina in New Orleans, like everybody came together and packing up things that we thought would be useful. That when I think about that and then think about our neighbors who are living in these McMansions, 50, 5,600, 6,000, 7,000 square feet, lonely as fuck. Like I'd pay more to live in a community where I am valued, known, taken care of. Someone's got my back. I've got someone else's back. Like that feels like a much more human way to live.
Absolutely. And I draw some of this from the blue zones. Like relationships are such a huge part of the longevity. And that was one of I think they have 9 pillars. And so, but also Dr. Bruce Perry, he talks about in the conference that I attended last year, was virtual. It was the power of research to inform policy. There were a couple of things in there that he said that stick out to me. One he said is that that privilege, that true privilege, is to grow up in a low trauma environment with predictable, relatively predictable experiences, so you can learn how to regulate your nervous system. Like that is privilege, And something that you said about, people in the McMansions, one of the things that I realized in this experience that we're having is that the privilege of what we currently call privilege is usually people that have a lot of money. And the only thing that I have found privileged about that is that people who live in those situations generally have enough money to hide their trauma and not have to address it. You know what I mean?
Right. And then their Gen Z kids have enough money to get therapy.
Right. Right. And usually don't, because they don't want that stigma, And so until they are, away from mom and dad, and they're living in a life. But like, that's one of the things with Raleigh right now. We have a huge uptick in this desirability for bars, and, and we've had one particular neighborhood, Glenwood South, has been transformed with the amount of bars they have, and the citizens come to almost every city council meeting complaining about the noise and the violence and the how they've talked with the police and how the police have send out, they double the amount of officers in that area between 1 and 3 in the morning, because that's when they've had the most incidents, and how there's, gun violence and things. Like one resident created a shirt that said, "I went to Glenwood South and survived." Like, and it's because all these young people are out there dealing with their traumas with alcohol, and we commune around trauma nowadays, and we don't even realize it. And so having something where you have community, the blue zones is definitely something that influence, but that is also, again, something that Dr. Perry talks about, is how one of the things that they realized is that in the past, it was when there was a high trauma situation involving a parent and a child, they would remove the child. And what they found out is that having a child in a high trauma situation, especially within like the first few years, and moving them to a low trauma situation, it didn't change the impact of their brain development very much. Like he had all these different measurements of being in high trauma, staying in high trauma, being in high trauma, moving to low trauma, being in low trauma, and then moving to high trauma, like over and that initial trauma was just like within the first year, and being in low trauma and staying in low trauma, and being in high trauma at the beginning of your life, and whether you left or you stayed, the numbers were not that distinct. Even talking about having low trauma in your early years and moving to a high trauma situation, you are better off than being in a high trauma situation and moving into a low trauma situation, just because of relationship. And so when they were taking these children out of these high trauma situations, they weren't taking into consideration the whole child and some healthy relationships they had that they were removing them from. And so that was impacting them negatively when they left that situation and went into another environment. And so he talks about how important the relational piece is, even in being able to deal with trauma as a child. And he said the thing that we need is to provide services for families, for the whole family, that we're addressing trauma on all levels, and that really resonated, with me, about how we say that we want to help children, but we make things so difficult for parents. We say that we want to, and that a lot of times there's so many services for children, but the parents were left behind. And so there's even some, I would say, jealousy that the parents didn't get that treatment when they were young, or they had that treatment but didn't have the support to be able to move in the direction of their greatness. You know what I mean? And so that makes it something that I wanted to combat, so that there is family support, that we are addressing the different needs that are in our society, and that we are bringing people together who want to be together and that can support one another, that they can feel good about where they're at, they can feel safe, and that their traumas don't define them. They actually empower them.
So let's talk about how the garden connects to all this, the physical garden, because there's a lot of talk about sort of entrepreneurship and, bringing entrepreneurship into traditionally marginalized communities. And there's a lot of value in that. And yet a lot of entrepreneurship is still kind of, smoke and mirrors around, like it's not actually creating value. But a garden, like you put something in the ground that is like tiny and didn't cost anything practically, and it grows into, 40 pounds of tomatoes, or 10 gallons of squash soup, or like there's something about participating in that kind of, I think, grounds you in some sort of fundamental abundance that I hear echoed when every time you talk to me, you say it's another amazing day in paradise. Like, does that come from the garden at some level?
Absolutely. I don't remember who said it, but somebody said, we are nature, and we spend so little time in it. We're in these glass and concrete, structures all day that take away from our energy, essentially. We wear shoes all the time. We're afraid of stepping on rocks and grass and dirt, and things of that nature. But we are nature, and we are essentially fighting against it. I just recently heard somebody say, when you fight against, it was in the movie, it was in the Need to Grow, I was just rewatching it. Somebody said, when you fight against nature, nature will always win.
Yeah,
it's true. But when we learn to coexist with nature, like when you nurture a garden, you're nurturing yourself. I don't know how you can put something in the ground and, like you said, watch it grow and not be moved by the experience that you had to help that come to pass, and there's just something about, it was also in the movie, The Need to Grow. And also I've gotten this from also Goodness Lover, because I'm really big about, the importance of our microbiome, that ecosystem that's within our gut, and how that connects to our vagus nerve, which connects to our brain, and how just what we put into our bodies, what we eat, is such a huge, huge factor in our behavior. Like being mindful of what my son has eaten on those days when things were the most tough and we had the least amount of money and junk food was the best option, being unhoused. That was something, I was always mindful that, okay, when he eats this, he might get crazy because this processed food is going to hit his system in a way that may alter his personality, And so many of us don't realize it. I remember in the movie The Need to Grow just talking about I wish I could remember his name, but he talks about how few people actually are able to go outside, cut a stalk of lettuce, cut a head of lettuce, and that milky white, this milky white substance that comes out at the end. This is when it is most nourishing, and how few people get the opportunity to eat it just from the ground like that, you know, and the difference that that is going to make in somebody's life to change their microbiome so that they can have health. They can look forward to health. They can look forward to beating all the predicted health disparities, and just to see like the colors that can come from the different varieties of things that you can grow. Um, I remember being at someone's home and there was a little garden in the back that they were using somebody else was using the space in the backyard to create a garden. And there were pumpkins growing back there. And I said I was watching these two children that lived there and my son, and they were like, the one child, he came in on his tablet and with his headphones on, wasn't even engaging with the other two kids. I was like, we're taking a 30-minute break because we got to get outside. And the little boy was like, we went and looked at the garden that's in his backyard that he's at every single day. And he was like, there's pumpkins out here. Mind you, these are full grown pumpkins. These aren't like little pumpkins. These are full grown pumpkins out here that he had never even noticed. And I was like, well, these look like they could use some water. Why don't we go in and we get some water and we can water them? And he was so engaged in it. He was like so excited. My son and one of the other little boy, they were playing with chalk on the sidewalk, and stuff like that. But this other little boy, he was like, wow, he's like, there's pumpkins back here. He's like, oh, and there's tomatoes. And, whether he ate them or not didn't matter, but his fascination and some of the leaves were starting to wither. And so just his desire to want to see it grow and to stay alive, and by adding water to it. I mean, we had the tiniest, sorriest little pictures of water to be able to water them, but we were able to do so. And, just having that experience was so beautiful because we remind ourselves of the innocence of childhood and how they were brought here to save the world. If he just for him to want to save those little plants, that were withering in the sun was such a beautiful experience, that can't be compared to many other things. But if we give our children that opportunity and then we don't just feed them, with good words, but we feed them with good food, just the potential that we could have for such a different world, for them not to live up to their fullest potential because they have the very best going inside of them, to start with. So gardening it's extremely important to me, and also just to have that accessibility of food and for people to realize that, yeah, you can just go outside and eat, you don't have to drive 10 minutes to the grocery store. You don't have to, you don't have to drive 10 minutes to the grocery store. You don't have to open a plastic package or anything like that. You just go outside and you eat. And it's an amazing, amazing gift.
Yeah. I can't remember which book, but it was one of the Daniel Quinn Ishmael books, where the mentor basically says the human civilization started when a bunch of people put the food under lock and key. Because before then, you couldn't compel anyone to do anything.
Wow.
Right? It was only when people had to dance for their food that you could, call a tune, tell them how much to dance, how high to jump.
That's powerful. And that's exactly what we see today, is that we've had to become beggars for things that are free, like the land, food. it grows abundantly, even if we don't cultivate it. If the seed is thrown into the ground, very often, it'll grow into something, without even being tended, just because that's what nature does. And so it's really quite fascinating how, once you put it in a store and lock it up and make it inaccessible to people, and even that it's crazy that you should even say that, because I also think about all the people who, like to dumpster dive. All these businesses throw away perfectly good products, throw away perfectly good food, and if you go to dumpster dive for it, you can get arrested, because the companies don't want that, they don't want their stuff taken, but they won't give it away either, so it's like,
Yeah. I have to admit that we really got into dumpster diving. It was just so much more fun than shopping.
absolutely, because you get like all these treasures and stuff like that.
We started doing it we had chickens. And so we'd walk past the dumpsters behind like the Whole Foods in Durham. And there would be like, all these wilted greens, like, the chickens would love these. So we started coming like with garbage bags at night. And then we see, well, below the greens, there's like 45 pounds of apples that are bruised. Right? And then, oh my gosh, and why did they throw out like an entire, the case of olive oil was like 2 days past due, right? And so we started looking into like, why isn't this food getting used intelligently? And there's like, fear of lawsuit, like if somebody gets sick from it. Whole Foods actually was trying to be zero waste. And so they had somebody come from, one of the recycling companies, might have been Brooks Contracting, and weighed it, and they were getting credits. So they would rather the things go into compost than get eaten by the community, because of basically an accounting protocol they put into place to show how green they were.
Wow. Yeah, money generally is a very big motivating factor. But honestly,
Yeah.
I feel like the biggest challenge that we have is that we have a lot of people doing things that they really don't want to do. Like when I think about, one of the things I was thinking about is just this idea of how we get people who are working in the homeless industry to transition. And when I went to the conference in DC, that's where I was at when I took the escalator, when we were in graduation. I remember talking to people, and like, I would ask, like, one of my big questions is like, what does your dream life look like? And the people that I talked to that were working in, services that were addressing homelessness, their dream lives had nothing to do with working in social services forever. They had other projects they were either working on or wanted to work on. And I think we've created this society where people have thought that like, this is the way to be, this is the way to live. Like, you have to have money. I remember also somebody saying, like, they came to America and they're like, America is just like a big shopping mall, like everywhere that's built, the housing that's being built is luxury, and there's always stores beneath it. We want walkable communities where people don't have to walk very far to get what they need. No, we want people to walk far so they can stay healthy, like,
Yeah.
And so it's really fascinating, but we have to give people an option of doing something different. And I think if we started asking people that question, if we started at the top with a CEO and said, what does your dream life look like? Are you living it? And more than likely, because they're making so much money, have you heard of the studies that say that people who make a lot of there's a certain cap and how much you can make where happiness and monetary value are synonymous, but beyond that point, like the more you make, the less happy you are, or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
there are studies, like you were saying, make mansions and they're miserable. Those are equitable. Those equal one another. And I was just like, it's not because of the house, it's not because of the money, it's because people don't have a purpose. That's what it is. People lack purpose when they get there because they feel like they've accomplished everything and yet they feel miserable inside because they haven't actually arrived to who they are and their purpose, just what was expected of them.
Yeah. Well, I think that's, I just published last week an interview with Philip Shepard, who writes about embodiment. And for him, the central problem with humanity is the split between the mind and the body, with the mind thinking it has to tell the body what to do. And he said that relationship is our primary relationship, and every other relationship between people, between countries, between us and nature follow that template of, I need you to do what I want you to do because I don't trust you to do good on your own. So, there's the entire, criminal justice system is based on the idea, and the entire educational system and the job market is based on the idea that people won't do what's good for all unless they have no choice, and we have carrots and sticks to move them in the right direction. And really, you're talking about a revolutionary step back from that, so that people can really have the space to discover their gifts and share them joyfully.
Yeah, that's so funny because it makes me think of all the times that my son tells me I'm bossing him around. He's like, "You're just bossing me around," because I'm like, I don't say. I'm like, okay, well, this is what we have to get done today. This is what I've got going on, blah, blah, blah. And he'll be like, that's not what he wants to do. That's not his agenda. I'm bossing him around. And I always like, you're right. I didn't ask you, I just made this plan and, let's figure out what we are going to do together today, And so parenting, I will say, is the problem, but it's also the solution. And so that's what it makes me think of is, my responsibility towards my son is to help him discover his gifts and his passions. And it was funny because for the longest time, he said he wanted to be a police officer, but then he found out about guns and hurting people and possibly getting hurt. And then he was like, he wants to be a firefighter now, or EMT, but he wants to help people. And then there was another level of discovery. And he was just like, you know what? I think I just want to be myself. When people ask him what he wants to be when he grows up, he's like, I think I just want to be myself, And I was like, yeah. And so his passion is emergency vehicles and cars and, and so many people they get siloed into, no, this is how you have to be. This is, you're in the family business. Imagine what the Food Revolution Network would be like, or if it would even have come to be if John Robbins didn't follow his passion and not follow down the $1 billion path that was already laid for him, with ice cream, And so we have this incredible opportunity to meet people where they're at and help them to discover or to at least unleash their God-given gifts. And I know that being unhoused has helped me to realize that, because whenever I would talk about the things, whenever I would go in for services and stuff, and they're like, well, do you work? And I'm like, yeah, I'm a mom. That's my most important career, and they would say, well, no, well, what kind of job do you want? I was like, well, I want to start this business and this is what I want it to do and stuff like that. And they're like, I remember one lady saying, well, you can't do that. You'll have to work on that at night. And I was just like, because that's what she had to do. And she was like, yeah, I understand what you're saying. Cause, I have this business and I had to do it at night and, and now it's doing this and stuff like that. And I was just like, and for people to continue, the thing that is insanity to me is that we know that small businesses fuel America, right? We know that is the foundation of what keeps it going, regardless of what the big companies are doing. People going into business and creating viable businesses that add service and value to our community is really important. And yet, instead of, my son just came out. Here, come on. It's okay. Come on, get under the blanket with me. And so, instead of helping people to discover those talents, monetize them, and learn how to live off of that, we force them into jobs that we know are not going to pay them enough to build credit, to be able to pay rent, to be able to pay bills. And we expect things to change, One of the biggest things that like hit me in the last probably 6 months or so is just how much money is speculated the African American community spends every year, trillions of dollars. And yet we're always talking about how so many of us are in poverty, you know? And I was just like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not that we don't know how to make money. We hustle all the time. I know what I've done to hustle, the legal stuff, I created a gratitude journal and, I've created gift baskets and, all sorts of things to sell. But I wasn't ever able to scale that and create a business out of it, so that it could become a viable income for me and my son, And I was like, if only
Mm-hmm.
somebody had seen the vision that I had and put forth the money and the not just the money, but put forth the education that I needed, connected me to the right people so that
Mm-hmm.
I could build the network that I'm now finally building that I didn't know I needed to build, we would be in a
Mm-hmm.
totally different position. But I'm so grateful. Yeah, part of it. But I'm so grateful for this journey that I've been on because now I know what needs to be done in order to help people to start from scratch, what kind of support they need in order for them to get to the life that they want, And because of what we've been through, I know what needs to happen differently, you know? And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm striving to do.
Mm. It's so powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Let's make sure. It sounds like wisdom wants his
Yes,
mama.
Wisdom wants his mama. He was sleeping
Well,
well when this started.
so uh, so so I'm gonna let you go. Thank you again. And oh, hey there. Hi. And for folks who want to follow you, I know I'll put up your online business card in the show notes again, but remind us of your
It
Instagram.
is love. It's L.U.V.Enterprises Presents LLC. I figure I've got to shorten that at some point, but right now that's what it is. And
Yeah.
it's probably the best way to find me. Or you can just Google L.U.V.Enterprises Presents. And most of my blog is under that. My Facebook page is under that. My Instagram is under that. And so most people in my YouTube channel, they're all under that same handle. So people can definitely
Okay. So love LUV with dots in the middle. Enterprises
presents.
presents. So probably any combination of two of those will
Yes, you should be able to find me.
help people find you one
Or
way or
Momma Kai. I
another.
guess if you can Google Momma Kai, you might find me too. MOMMAKAI.
Awesome. Awesome. And I'll throw links to that in the show notes. And it's lovely connecting with you again. Thank you so much for taking the time, for getting up early and sharing the beautiful nature from the Western North
Yes,
Carolina with
yes.
me.
Thank you so much. And Ken, I just want to say thank you to you. I've I had a lot of people reach out to me when the first interview aired, and
Oh,
we're
good.
actually staying in this home because of that interview. Somebody reached out, they were going to be out of town, and they're like, "Would you like to come and stay for a week?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so there was another person who reached out and said, "I love what you're doing. I didn't know I thank you so much for sharing this with me." Someone that we had met a couple of years ago, when we had stayed in an emergency shelter, she said that they've been wondering how we were doing and stuff like that. And so I'm in the process of reconnecting with that person who actually is a doctor. And so
Hmm.
there have been a lot of wonderful things, and even people who haven't seen the video have read what you wrote. And so there's been just so much positive feedback from what you allowed me to share. And so I just want to say thank you for this platform and for being interested. It's seriously been a huge gift for us.
Oh, wow. That's awesome to hear. Because I don't actually know that anybody watches or listens. I don't check. So, so that's a gift to me right there.
Yeah, it's having a huge impact. And So yeah, I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate it. And and it's giving people an opportunity to get to know me from a totally different outlet. So I'm extremely
Hmm.
grateful and very honored to have been here.
Wow, music to my ears.
Yay!
Thank you. Well, let's keep it going. So hit me up whenever you got something new you want to
I will
share.
definitely do that.
We'll keep making it happen. All right, I'll probably be back in town end of
Okay,
October
cool.
if you're around. We got to meet up.
Definitely. I look forward to that.
Me too. Momma Kai, Carolyn Sanders, thank you so much for all you're doing and for taking the time
Thank
today.
you again. It's greatly appreciated.
Okay.
We're out.
And thank you, Wisdom, for sharing your mom.
I wasn't really here when you guys even started because you were on here for an hour and you're about to get to an hour and 10 minutes.
We are. It's true.
That's true. That's true. It's an extra special episode, more than an
And you get to
hour.
star in it for a little bit.
Yep, and you're
I
there.
guess.
Well, thank you, Howie.
Can we move the camera so you're both in the shot? All right, I'm gonna try to grab this screen grab if that's all
Yeah.
right.
You gonna smile?
If I can, Wisdom, you okay? You okay having your picture in the show? Sweet, awesome. All right, have a great
Thanks,
day
you too.
in
Yes,
paradise.
absolutely. You too. Enjoy creating it.
Okay, bye. And that's a wrap. So not much movement lately. My back got cranked. I played in an ultimate tournament on artificial turf on Saturday, played 2 games, and my feet were killing me and my back was killing me. And apparently at the age of 58, I now have the maturity to not play the 3rd game, to say, hey, I'm done here. And I woke up on Sunday morning with raging plantar fasciitis and a back that was makes me kind of look like a comma. So I've been working on that. I've returned to a plantar fasciitis prevention, in this case healing and then prevention routine that involves lots of heel raises and stretches, and gonna prioritize strengthening the core. I have a friend here who is a Pilates teacher who might be helping me out. I could look for a couple of gyms as well and follow Philip Shepard's advice from Deep Fitness and start to work those inner muscles as well. Right now I'm just taking it easy. I have been watching lots of paddle videos on YouTube, starting to understand the difference between paddle and the 3 racket sports that I have played: squash, racquetball, and tennis. So looking forward to be able to get back on the court for that. Otherwise, again, a lot of requests to talk more about life in Spain, and I'm going to do that. And also next week, I believe, if it works out, my friend, the very good Dr. Glenn Livingston, is going to be interviewing me about my coaching, about how I coach people, how I help people change their lives, achieve radical transformation. My coaching has itself undergone some radical transformation over the past year, and I'm looking forward to sharing those perspectives with you. All right, that's it for this week. As always, be well, my friends.